friends, and welcome to Out of Pocket. My name is Ryan, aka Ron, and today is another Heuristics Help. Heuristics Help! Today we are looking at basic Pokemon math. I am actually legitimately excited for this segment, and ideally you will find it interesting as well. So what are we planning to do today? In a nutshell, Pokemon Pocket cards and really all trading card games, and frankly you could probably apply this to board games and a lot of other things, are math. If you look at a Pokemon Pocket card, it's math. It's just literal numbers. The developers have come up with certain heuristics, certain numbers that they want to put on each card, and then they put it on the card, they make it look cool, they make the numbers mean different things. They have abilities, they have HP, they have cost, they have retreat, they have attack, whatever. They're all numbers. It's math. And then they put it on a card and they make it look cool, and they try to have consistency across heuristics, which is what we're planning to look at. And then you have a game, and then you put art on it, and then you fight each other, and it's a fun game. But at the end of the day, a lot of it breaks down to math. So that's basically what I want to look at here. Now you might be asking, what's the point? Why do this? What's the purpose? Well, basically for me, it's interesting. So to be honest, it's interesting. It kind of gets you into the mind of the developers a little bit. Now, I'm not claiming I've figured out how exactly the developers are developing their cards mathematically. I think I've got some pretty good ideas, but I'm not exactly sure. I would have to confirm it with someone from DINA or DNA or whatever before I was fully certain. But at the end of the day, part of it's interest for me, but a lot of it is just, it tells you immediately how good a card is in a vacuum. I do want to emphasize that the math of each card is in a vacuum. So like if I look at Tapu Koko and it's say it's average math, we'll plan to look at it in a little while, but say it's average in a vacuum, that's great. But then you have Electrical Cord and you have Zeraora and you have Oricorio and you have all these things that help it. But this segment is just about looking at cards in a vacuum mathematically to look at A, the consistency that DINA is putting into their cards, and B, it just kind of gives you a bit of an idea of how strong a card is off the bat without even having meta decks or comparing it to anything or putting it in with synergy with other Pokemon. It just kind of gives you a baseline for how good cards are. I like that because it helps me frame the game better, it helps me deck build better, it helps me know what kind of cards I want to use, what Pokemon I want to use specifically, and so that's kind of some merits of knowing math. But now let's jump in. All right, check this out. We have a formula, so bear with me if your mind just exploded and you can't handle this. I promise it'll make sense once I put a picture with it. But this is the general formula. It's not complex for how Pocket designs their cards. So they have HP plus attack minus retreat cost minus attack cost plus beneficial effects minus adverse effects. Now, quickly, what are beneficial effects? What are adverse effects? All right, so beneficial effects or abilities would be anything such as the opponent can't retreat. So if I swing at you, Arbok is an example of this. I swing and the opponent can't retreat. That has a numerical value on it, or at least I'm pretty certain it does. Something such as burning your opponent has numerical value, confusing your opponent, anything like that. Or modifiers such as take 20 less damage from attack. So Skarmory is an example off the top of my head. It swings for 70. It takes minus 20 damage the next turn from attacks if it gets attacked. Adverse would be anything harmful. So Solgaleo, take 10 damage from an attack. Solgaleo is an example. It swings for 120. It takes 10 damage to itself. Or discard all energy. So Infernape EX is an example of this. It swings for 140, I think, and then it discards its energy. So it's 2 costs, but then it discards its energy. So that's an adverse effect. Again, to go through the formula, you have HP plus attack minus retreat minus attack cost plus beneficial effects minus adverse effects. That's kind of complicated. Let me put a card and it'll make so much more sense. All right, check this out. So Hitmonchan is a basic that has no evolution. It epitomizes to me the basic math for basic Pokemon with no evolution. So we do the formula at the top. So HP 80 plus attack 30 minus retreat 1 retreat. I call that 10. Now this is where I may be a little different from DINA, DNA potentially. I am considering retreat for each energy. It's 10. So minus 10. 10. So minus 1 retreat in this case is 10. 2 retreat would be minus 20, 3, 30, and so on. It's possible that Dina is valuing that differently, but that helps me. I find pretty consistent numbers doing this method. So for me, it's minus 10 retreat. Now, attack cost, also jab is 1 fighting energy. Now, I think this is where I'm not certain if I align with Dina or not, but basically I'm doing a stacking system. So let me pull it up here and show you. All right, so check out the top there above Hitmonchan. This is how I am personally valuing energy. So the first energy is minus 10. So Hitmonchan's jab only costs 1, so it's minus 10. Now, if it was a 2 cost, then I would do minus 10 for the first energy and minus 20 for the second energy. So 30 total. And then the third one, minus 30, fourth, minus 40, fifth, minus 50. In other words, I am adding an additional 10 to each energy cost because the more an attack cost, the worse it is in terms of practical output. So if I have a 5 cost attack, the odds that I'm going to actually get to that attack in time to use it are not high. So I think for each additional energy that an attack costs, there should be more math penalty, if you will. It should be worth a lot more in terms of math because it's a lot harder. The more an attack costs, basically to summarize, the more an attack costs, the harder it is to use. Therefore, I think it should be worth a lot more mathematically speaking, if that made sense. So Hitmonchan first. So we have 80 HP, so 80 plus 30, that's 110, minus retreat is 100, minus 10 for its energy is 90. So to summarize, and I'll put this up on top too, I would say the average basic Pokemon math for basic, this is with no evolutions, so not basics with an evolution, for basic Pokemon that are just basic and nothing else, not EX. As you can see, there's an EX number there. We'll plan to get into that in a little while. For just basics, no EX, their average math or general math is 90. Now, it's good to have a baseline because that tells you what other Pokemon are like when you compare. And I do believe 90 is the basic with this math. Now, I do want to say this quickly. Dina has color type energy, so in this case, fighting for Hitmonchan, but they also have colorless energy. Now, I do think Dina values the energy differently, and I think they value each color type energy at 20 and each colorless energy at 10, I believe. However, because I personally only run decks with one energy type, I don't really care if the energy is colorless or not colorless. So my math is only based off of how many energy, not the type of energy. So I'm not factoring in colorless into my calculations, as it were. But from a game developing perspective, I'm pretty confident that Dina is valuing colorless energy cheaper, I think half as much as color type energy, if that makes sense. So let me give an example of that. Here's Oricorio. We all know Oricorio. It has a 2 energy cost, so it has a lightning and a colorless. I'm pretty sure Dina values their lightning, their color type energies at 20, so this would be minus 20 for that lightning energy, and their colorless energy at 10, so minus 10 for the colorless energy, which is a total of minus 30. Now that so happens to equal what I am valuing energy at, which in this case is minus 10 for the first energy and minus 20 for the second energy, which is a total of minus 30. Let me throw up the totals on here so it's less confusing. All right, so I put the totals here. So basically, if you have a 2 energy Pokemon attack, it's minus 30 total mathematically, 3 energy 60, 4 energy minus 100, 5 energy minus 150, etc., etc. I don't know if there's a 6 energy attack. I don't think there is. That would be crazy, but nonetheless. So while we're at it, let's break down Oricorio real quick. So we have 70 HP, so 70 plus 50 attack, that's 120, minus 10 for its retreat cost, and then minus 30 for its energy, because remember, it's 10 for the first energy, 20 for the second energy. So that's 70 plus 50, 120, minus 10 is 110, minus 30 for the energy cost is 80. And then, as I said before, the baseline is 90. So basically what they're saying mathematically is we are valuing Oricorio's safeguard ability at 10 to get to base math, which is ridiculous because not being hit by EX is worth way more than 10. It's worth a lot. So basically, I would say Oricorio's ability, it's hard to value mathematically how much is it worth to not get hit by EX, more than 10. So in other words, Oricorio is very above rate, which we all know that, but just mathematically, this is helpful for me. It's above rate mathematically. So that's something practically that I'm looking for in new sets. I'm looking mathematically, okay, I have a basic Pokemon. I know my base is 90, so let me look at the HP, the ability, the attack, everything, and compare compare it and see how it all breaks down. If it's over 90, I'm like, okay, that's probably a Pokemon just that's worth running. Obviously, you don't have to do this because we can all look at Oricorio and go, oh, that's great. But mathematically, I like to know it's more specific, and so it helps me. All right, let's look at another example to make this a little more clear. So here we have Stunfisk. It has a lightning and a colorless. So again, I think Dina's valuing that differently than I am. But for our purposes, I'll put it back up top. Each energy is the same as far as I'm concerned. Because if I put Stunfisk in a deck, which I would never do, I'm only running lightning energy. So functionally, that colorless means nothing to me. So that's how I value math, since I'm only running one energy decks and not looking at the game from an entire meta perspective. All right, so remember our base is 90. This is a Pokemon that has no evolution, so we're looking for it to equal 90. So we have 90 HP, so there's 90, plus 50 attack, that's 140. If you need a calculator, go for it. 90 plus 50, that's 140. Now we have 2 retreat costs, so to me that's 10 each. So 1020, so 90 HP plus 50 attack, that's 140, minus 20 retreat cost, minus 30 for the energy cost, because it's 10 for the first energy, as you can see above, 20 for the second energy. So that's minus 30. So 90 plus 50, 140, minus 20 retreat cost, minus 30 attack cost is 90. If that doesn't make sense, just run it back. Here, we'll plug it into the formula to make it look easier. All right, so check it out. I plugged it in. So we have our formula. We have 90 HP plus 50 attack minus 20 retreat cost minus 30 attack cost equals 90. So that's the baseline we're looking for basic Pokemon. Let me give one more example. All right, here's a fairly simple one. We have Latias. We have 90 HP plus 20 attack, that's 110, minus 10 retreat cost, that's 100, minus 10 attack cost, that's 90. Now, Latias is on rate by itself, but if you have Latios on your bench, this attack does 20 more. In other words, mathematically speaking, by what I have seen, Latias is 20 points above rate once it has Latios on its bench, but by itself it's still on rate. All right, let me give one more example because I want to make sure this is at least somewhat clear. So we have Hitmontop, so 80 HP plus 20 attack, that's 100, minus 20 retreat cost because it's 10 each, so that we're back to 80, and then minus 10 for its attack cost, so we're at 70, but it does 20 to one of your opponent's bench Pokemon. So if you value that equally to just doing attack to your opponent's active Pokemon, which I do because I think it's a give and take, right? You're losing 20 to the active, you're gaining 20 to the bench, therefore I value it the same, then you're adding 20 more, so now we're back to 90. So basically Dina is valuing their basic Pokemon with no evolutions at 90. Now again, that could mean nothing to you, but mathematically they have a consistent threshold that they're shooting for, and when they go over it with something like Oricorio, they probably know they're breaking their own math, and it's really easy to tell if you just math it out like this. All right, now let's move on briefly. Now I'm planning to look at basic Pokemon that have only a stage 1 evolution. Now this is pretty closely aligned with basic Pokemon with a stage 2 evolution, but I want to look at a couple examples. So the baseline for this is generally 60, not 90, it's usually 60. Now sometimes it's less, as in this case. So we have Execute, we have 50 HP plus 20 attack, that's 70, minus 10 retreat cost, that's 60, minus 10 attack cost is 50. So we're at 50. I'm saying the baseline is 60, we're at 50 here with the Execute, but let me show you an example at 60 because that's the most common. All right, if you've played the game for any length of time, this is a very familiar formula to you. You have 60 HP, 20 attack, 10 retreat cost, 10 attack cost. This is very familiar. It's on a ton of different cards. It's on basic Pokemon with stage 1 and stage 2 evolutions. This is a very, very familiar formula. So 60 HP plus 20 attack is 80, minus 10 retreat cost, minus 10 attack cost is 60. This is the base for most stage 1 Pokemon, is this 60 number right here. And it's generally speaking the base for most stage 2 Pokemon, but we'll plan to get into that in a second. But briefly back to Execute. Why would Rockruff be 60, but Execute here has 10 less HP? Well, I think it could be a number of things. It could be that Dina thinks grass has a bunch of support, which is not really true right now. It could be that when they made this, they thought that grass was too good, so they needed to diminish it. My main theory is that when the basic Pokemon suffers, so in this case, the Execute here has 10 less HP than the Rockruff we just looked at. My theory is, and I think it's generally correct mathematically, is that the evolution for this Pokemon is going to be 10 points better than the evolution for Rockruff. So in this case, the Executor is going to be a little bit better mathematically than Lycanroc, which evolves from Rockruff, if that makes sense. I'm not planning to look at evolutions today. We'll plan to do that a different day, probably probably next month. But basically what I'm saying here is if a basic Pokemon is a little worse than another basic Pokemon, or a little worse than the general math, so in this case Execute, then my suggestion is that its evolution, in this case Executor, is going to be a little bit stronger than the average stage 1. All right, now briefly let's look at stage 2 basic Pokemon. So these are basic Pokemon that have a stage 2 evolution, so they evolve 2 times. So generally I would say stage 1 basics are 60, but stage 2 basics are either 50 or 60. And I would say, again, like I just said with Executor, that the math usually evens out in the evolution. In other words, this Hoppip has 50 HP. If a stage 2 has a basic that has 60 HP, then my guess is that evolution is a little bit worse than Hoppip's evolution here. So to say it clearly, if the math on a basic is 50 that has a stage 2 evolution, and the math on a different basic with a stage 2 evolution is 60, then I'm generally speaking gonna say that the stage 2 evolution for this Hoppip that's 50 is gonna be a little bit stronger than the stage 2 evolution for a Pokemon that has 60. So here's an example. We have Chimchar. Now Chimchar has a stage 2 evolution, Infernape, but it has 60 HP, unlike what we just looked at, which has 50 HP. Now I'm suggesting that the Chimchar has a little bit weaker stage 2 evolution than this Hoppip that we just looked at. I'm suggesting that Jumpluff is a little bit stronger mathematically, generally speaking, than Infernape, because this Hoppip has 50 HP, whereas this Chimchar has 60 HP. Now, I don't think this is a universal rule, because sometimes they break their own math. Sometimes they just put out really strong cards. We'll plan to look at some of them, but in general, I am saying that's the rule. If a Pokemon that has evolutions is a little stronger mathematically on the basic side, I'm suggesting their evolutions might be a little bit weaker. If a Pokemon's a little bit weaker on the basic side, I'm suggesting their evolutions, or at least one of them, will be a little bit stronger. But now for some more fun stuff that should help clarify everything, let's look at all the EX basic Pokemon. All right, so this is where it gets interesting. Basically, I want to look at all of the basic EX Pokemon mathematically in order from what I am deeming the worst math to the best math. So basically, Lugia, I am saying mathematically is the worst. Now, if you'll recall from the math that I just said, a basic Pokemon with no evolution is usually going to be worth 90 mathematically. And if you were really astute and saw earlier, I am suggesting that the average for basic EX Pokemon is 150. Now, if you're looking at this, I'm rating Lugia at 100 because by itself, it sucks. It's terrible. It needs a friend. It needs a Ho-Oh. It needs a baby Pokemon. By itself, it is not good. It is a one-shot Pokemon designed to kill one time, and that's about it. So let's break this down mathematically. We have 150 HP plus 180 attack cost minus 20 retreat minus 60 energy cost initially. Now, I know it says 100 up there, but initially it's minus 60 because it's 3 energy. So it's 10 for the first energy, 20 for the second energy, 30 for the third energy. That's minus 60. The reason I have it as minus 100 cost is because I am mathematically valuing having an additional energy type at minus 20. In other words, if this was just fire, I would only value it at minus 60 cost. If it was just water, I would only value it at minus 60 cost. Just lightning, same thing. But because it's fire, water, and lightning, I'm valuing at minus 20 for each additional energy. I'm not going to get into the specifics of how I came up with that number, but basically I am valuing each additional type of energy, in this case that's 2, at minus 20. So that's minus 40 total for the additional energy types. So you have your minus 60 cost just for the attack, and then minus 40 cost for the additional energy types. That's a total of how I got that minus 100 number up there. Now additionally, you'll see up there minus 100 energy. What does that mean? Well, if you'll look at the text under Elemental Blast, Lugia discards a fire, a water, and a lightning energy as soon as it attacks. So basically, I am valuing that text exactly the same as the normal cost. In other words, because it has the minus 100 energy cost, and then it gets rid of all its energy, it has to build back up again to get back to that cost. So basically, I'm just saying it does that 2 times. So it's minus 100 cost for the first one, and then it has to build back up again to get back to attacking, and then it's minus 100 for the second one because it's discarding all of that energy in the first place, if that makes sense. If none of this makes sense, please feel free to ask questions or talk about it in the comments, and I will try to explain it a little bit better, but I'm trying my best here. All right, and then lastly, on Lugia's formula, you're seeing minus 10 for colorless. The reason I'm doing that is because colorless have no strength. They do not attack anything that does extra damage because they're colorless Pokemon. So I'm valuing that in my math at -10. Now I think Dina's not really accounting for this mathematically because colorless can slot into any deck. So I think that kind of makes up for the fact in their minds that they don't have any strength into any Pokemon. But for my purposes, again, because I'm running decks with only one energy type, I'm valuing the colorless at -10 because they have no strength. So if I'm playing a psychic deck and I'm pairing it with a colorless Pokemon, which I do have one of those, and I'm playing a fighting deck, some fighting Pokemon are weak to psychic. So my psychic Pokemon is going to swing for +20 more damage than it would normally because it has a strength into that fighting Pokemon, whereas my colorless partner is not going to swing for that +20. Now, because that's only relevant sometimes, I'm only valuing it at -10 instead of -20, if that makes sense, because there's not that many games necessarily where you're swinging strength into another Pokemon, even if you're playing a color type, unless you're just fully teching for the meta. So like if you're playing a lightning deck right now, and you're probably running into a lot of Suicune decks where your lightning is doing +20 damage. But all that to say, I'm valuing colorless at -10. So that leaves Lugia with an overall math, if you do all that math up there, of 100, which again is terrible. It's so bad. So that's where we're putting Lugia. Now let's move on to a different one. All right, check this thing out. Ultra Necrozma. This thing is also terrible. But as you'll notice in that bold number up there, I have given it a total number of 130 instead of Lugia's 100. In other words, Lugia by itself is by far, in my opinion, mathematically and otherwise, the worst EX Pokemon in the game unless it has appropriate partners. But again, I am just valuing these Pokemon right now by themselves. I'm not valuing them with synergy. I'm not valuing them with anything else like Elemental Switch or any supporter cards. I'm just valuing them for their own merit. All right, now let me break this down and try to make it make sense. So this is another element of the game that I have to add. So this thing, Ultra Necrozma, has 2 attacks. So I did a lot of thinking about, well, how do I value 2 attacks mathematically? And this is what I've come up with. Basically, for each attack, you do the normal formula, except you don't keep retreat because the Pokemon it has 2 attacks, but it's only one Pokemon, so it only has 1 retreat cost. So you save that for the end, but you do the normal math. So for the first attack, Photon Claw, you got 150 HP plus 60 attack minus 60 cost. That equals 150. And then for the second attack, you have 150 HP plus 120 attack minus 120 for the energy. Again, how I got that, you have minus 100 for the normal energy because it's 10 for the first, 20 for the second, 30 for the third, 40 for the fourth, that's 100. And then I'm adding another minus 20 because it has 2 energy types. So it runs psychic and metal energy for its attack. So therefore I'm valuing that at minus 20, which is a total of minus 20 cost for Shoegaze. Future Ryan here just wanted to mention briefly that for the Shoegaze ability that discards the top 5 of each player's deck, I consider that canceling itself out because in theory it hurts you just as much as it hurts them. Now it could be better if, say, you're on Sylveon and Ultra Necrozma and you get through your deck and suddenly you're just discarding all of their cards and you have all of your cards. There's a world in which it could be better, but for the sake of argument, I'm just going to say in general, it's about the same and it cancels out. Now back to the thing. And if you add all of that up, it is also 150. So then what I do is I take 150 for the first attack, Photon Claw, plus 150 for the second attack, Shoegaze. I add those together, that's 300, and then I divide by 2, which is redundant, it's 150, and then I factor in the retreat cost because Ultra Necrozma only has 1 retreat cost. It's not retreating for each attack, it just has a retreat cost. So it's minus 20 for the retreat, that's what gets me to 130. I should mention here a couple of things. Number 1, retreat cost is only relevant if you're retreating. So some decks might be like, I never retreat. That's one of the tags in the game. I never retreat. Maybe you don't retreat. Well, then mathematically for you, don't worry about retreat costs. Just worry about attack cost. Or maybe here you're like, who cares about Photon Claw? I only care about Shoegaze. Well, then just do the math for Shoegaze. But again, I'm looking at these cards holistically. And so this is the best I've come up with in terms of how to mathematically evaluate these cards. The second thing real quick, and going back to Lugia, you could value Lugia be a higher in theory because 180 is kind of like a closing cost, right? So if you have, 1 point and you kill an EX, you just end the game, and then the discarding energy doesn't matter. Or if you have 2 points and you kill anything, you win the game and the discarding doesn't matter. So you could value a little bit differently because Lugia is the type of Pokemon that just ends games, but I have not factored that in. I'm still factoring in the discard into my math. So just wanted to throw that out there if you're interested in really parsing things out. All right, moving on, we have Rayquaza. So again, we're at 130 right now. I said the average is 150. So basically we're looking at a bunch of EX Pokemon right now that are not very good as a standalone. Now they might have good synergy, they might have good partner stuff, but as a standalone, they're not good. So Rayquaza, here's our math. We got 140 HP. Now it does 160 attack total. It's 40, 40, 40, 40. That's 160. We'll get into the random in a second. So 140 plus 160 minus 20 retreat cost minus 100 cost for the attack because it's got 4 energy cost. And then what I have done mathematically for the randomness, so just to read it real quick, Draco Meteor says one of your opponent's Pokemon is chosen at random 4 times. For each time a Pokemon was chosen, do 40 damage to it. So basically Rayquaza is just throwing 40 at stuff. So it might do 200 on one of your Pokemon and none at the other. It might do 40, 40, 40, 40 on all of your Pokemon. It's totally random. And so I have said mathematically that has to be negative something because it's random. You can't control it. That's a negative variance in some sense. And so I have said it's minus cost for whatever the damage it's doing. In other words, because Rayquaza does 40, 40, 40, 40, I'm mathematically saying take away 40 from its total math because of the randomness. That's just how I've done it. So Wugtrio is another example. We'll plan to get to that next month, but Wugtrio is 50, 50, 50. So I've said because it's 50 per each attack, because it's random, I'm taking away 50 mathematically for Wugtrio because it does 50. I think that's a pretty good way to do it. Again, you could tweak all of these metrics, but this is how I'm doing it. So we have minus 40 for random and minus 10 for colorless. I've already covered why I'm doing minus 10 for colorless, so we're left with a total of 130. All right, let's go a little bit quicker. All right, boom, Buzzwole. So a lot of people like Buzzwole. It's very, very good with Celesteela, but by itself, not so good. So let's mathematically look at it. As you'll see, it's also 130. So it's right with Rayquaza and Ultra Necrozma. So again, it's got 2 attacks, so I'm looking at them individually and then factoring in the retreat last. So it's 140 HP for the first attack punch, 140 HP plus 30 attack minus 30 cost. That's 140. Second attack, big beat, 140 HP plus 80 attack. I'll explain that in a second. Minus 60 cost is 160. The reason I am saying it's 80 is because I needed to do something to balance out the fact that during the next turn, this Pokemon can't use big beat. So in other words, Buzzwole can use big beat once and then it cannot use it the next turn unless it retreats back to the bench and then comes back in, which is why Celesteela is so good. And that's what makes Buzzwole so good, when it can keep using big beat over and over again. But by itself, it can't do that. So if you're running Buzzwole for some reason without Celesteela, not very good probably. And so mathematically what I have said, because again, this is all about math, I'm trying to make everything have numerical value for my own purposes and because it's helpful in understanding the game. I have said, looking at this and other attacks that are similar, I have said that I am mathematically making it 2/3 of its cost. So that would be 80. So 40, 80, 120, 2/3. I think that's an appropriate expense for the attack. Now you could say it's worth half, right? Because if you're just in the active, you do 120, then you do 0, then you do 120, then 0. So that would average out to 60. You could say that, but because of the nature of the attack, how powerful it is, and the fact that you can sometimes get around the negative effect for using big beat, I think I wanted to add a little bit on top of the halfway point, and so that's why I've said 2/3. So again, you could do that math totally different. That's just how I've done it, but because of that, I'm saying big beat's worth 80. So then you add those two together, you have punch worth 140, you have big beat worth 160. Together, that's 300. You divide it by 2, that's 150, and then you take out the retreat cost at the end, so now we're back down to 130. So basically what I'm telling you is mathematically Buzzwole sucks unless it has partners, but once it has Celesteela, It's pretty good. Y'all, I think this video is going to be super long. I apologize, but this is interesting to me and we're going to keep rolling. All right, so Moltres. So now we're introducing yet another different element to this math formula. I have tried to figure out math for all of these things and it has exhausted me to some degree and been somewhat hard, but I think I've come up with some good heuristics and we're keeping rolling. All right, so Moltres, we have an ability that says flip 3 coins, take an amount of fire energy from your energy zone equal to the number of heads and attach it to your benched fire Pokemon in any way you like. In other words, if you flip 1 head, you put 1 fire energy on the benched Pokemon. If you flip 2 heads, you put 2 fire energy, 3 heads, 3 fire energy. Now, I have said that I think each energy generation effect is worth 20. I've done a lot of thinking about that. I'll plan to get into specifics on that in a future video, but basically I am valuing energy generation at 20 apiece. So in other words, because we're coin flipping, here's another element, coin flips. I do exactly 50-50 on coin flips. So the maximum amount of energy you can get is 3 here. I would value that mathematically at 60. The minimum is 0 because you can flip 3 tails. And so what's the median of that? 30. And so I am valuing its first ability at 30. Now, taking all that into account, let's go through our formula. So we have for the first attack or ability, in this case, we have 140 HP plus 30 for the benefit, which is what I just went through, and then minus 10 cost for the energy cost. That's 160. Now for the second attack, we have 140 HP plus 70 attack plus 60 energy cost is equal to 150. Now I take that and I go 160 plus 150 is 310. Divide that by 2, 155 minus our 20 retreat cost at the end, that's 135. So I am also saying that Moltres is not very good. And I also don't like flipping coins. Now, if you hit heads every single time with Moltres, then you could add 30 to that first ability. So that now you're at 190 and suddenly you're pretty good, right? And so people, I think, like Moltres back in the day because sometimes you're just crushing it, right? And sometimes adding energy to your bench Pokemon is worth a ton. But in a vacuum, I would say Moltres, not very good. All right, moving on to the 140s. We're going up in the world. So we got Snorlax EX. So let's go through the math. We got 160 HP, 130 attack, minus 40 retreat cost, minus 100 cost for its attack, minus 10 for being colorless. That's 140. Now, it has an ability. So if you remember the formula, we have plus beneficial abilities minus detrimental abilities. So in this case, we have an ability that's positive. So it says at the end of your turn, if this Pokemon is in the active spot, heal 20 damage from it. I'm valuing this ability at plus 20. And here's how I got that. This is somewhat subjective. I will be totally honest. It's somewhat subjective, but here's how I valued it. I'm valuing the healing just at face value. So plus 20, I'm valuing it at plus 10 for being constant. In other words, you don't have to attack to do it or whatever, but I'm valuing it at minus 10 for being at the end of the turn. So it would be amazing if it was at the beginning of the turn. If it was like, all right, you get hit and then beginning of your turn, you go up 20, like that's great. Because then, for example, you could put it in the active spot, you could heal 20, then you could retreat and you would still have that 20. But because it's at the end of the turn, I'm going to take away 10. So that means total, I'm valuing that ability at 20. And then basically sleep, because it puts itself to sleep when it attacks, I'm canceling out that plus 20. So I'm valuing being asleep at minus 20. Again, I'll plan to get into that math in a future video, but basically I'm suggesting that the healing cancels out with the fact that it falls asleep. Therefore, the total is 140 if you do all of that math. All right, moving on to Pikachu. Let's do our formula. We get 120 HP plus 150 attack, minus 10 retreat cost, minus 60 cost for the energy. And then again, if you'll recall from Lugia, I'm saying minus 60 for the fact that it discards all of its energy. So basically I'm valuing the cost the same as the discard because you have to do it twice. So if you want to attack 2 times with this, you have to build up your 3 energy and then you have to build up your 3 energy again. So basically I'm just saying that's times 2. In other words, minus 120 total. Now again, as I said with Lugia, Pikachu's kind of a finisher. So Pikachu is often looking to just finish the game. So you could add some math to that because it's looking to just finish. But again, I'm taking it in a vacuum. I'm assuming you want your energies back and that's how I'm valuing it. All right, check it out. Pikachu number 2. So I am valuing this one also at 140. We have 120 HP plus 60 attack. I'll plan to get into that in a second. Minus 10 retreat, minus 30 cost for the attack. Now, the ability says this attack does 30 damage for each of your benched Pokemon. So if you have one bench, it does 30. If you have two bench, it does 60. If you have three bench, it does 90. I am assuming two bench average. So I'm taking the averages with this math. I'm assuming two on average. Now, if you assume three bench, suddenly we're at 170 for this Pikachu, which I would say is very above rate. So if you always have a full bench with this thing, it's very, very good. But if you're just saying on average, I have two bench Pokemon, then it's okay. It's not great, in fact. So again, that's another heuristic I've made. I've said if a Pokemon has something that is reliant on you having a bench, so think of this Pikachu, think of Arceus, I'm valuing that at 2/3. I'm saying if I have control of my bench, I'm gonna assume on average I have 2 out of my 3 bench slots filled. Now that could be shooting low. I could be wrong on that. It could be like, hey, usually you got 3 if you got Arceus, you know, usually you got 3 if you got Pikachu. Maybe that's correct. For math purposes, I'm assuming you have 2 on average, which is how I arrived at the 140 number. All right, check out this paragraph up here. We got Eevee EX. I'm also in the 140s still. So we got 90 HP, plus 30 attack, minus 10 retreat, minus 10 attack cost, minus 10 colorless is equal to 90. Now, I am totally arbitrarily, and I will admit it's totally arbitrary, valuing its ability at 50 because there is nothing else in the game like this. It's a very strong ability, and so I figured I would value it at 50. Here's the breakdown. I'm saying plus 20 for being able to evolve. So usually you can't evolve the EXs. In fact, this is the only EX that can evolve. And then I'm saying plus 10 for being able to evolve into a lot of things. So there's a ton of different evolutions for this thing. I'm valuing that at 10 arbitrarily. And then I'm saying plus 20 for being able to put 4 Eevees in the deck. So in other words, you can put this Eevee in the deck with normal Eevees. I'm valuing that at plus 20. So therefore that brings the whole thing to 140. This is a fairly arbitrary mathematical card. Obviously it's very strong, but that's where I'm at. All right, moving on to Celebi. We have 130 HP plus 50 attack because I am averaging that. So if you're fulfilling this energy cost, then you have 2 energy, then you can do max 100, minimum 0. So I'm averaging that to 50. So 130 HP plus 50 attack on average, minus 10 retreat, minus 30 cost, that's 140. So basically by itself, it's not great. It's not great. You can high roll with it, but it's not very good. Obviously, if you're hitting heads every time, this thing's worth 190. That's ridiculous, but you're not hitting heads every time. That's how they balanced it. Now, with Superior, this thing is very good. The math gets a whole lot better with Superior, but again, that's synergy. That's adding other cards in. I am just taking cards at face value, so Celebi by itself is not that good. All right, next we got Articuno. So again, we got 2 attacks here, so we're doing the math the same way we've done it previously. So first attack, we got 140 HP plus 40 attack minus 30 cost, that's 150. Second attack, we have 140 HP still plus 80 attack minus 60 cost, and then I'm saying plus 15 on average for the bench. Now if you'll recall with Pikachu, the Pikachu that has a 2 cost attack that's dependent on your bench, I'm assuming 2/3 for your bench. In other words, I'm assuming I can control my own bench reasonably well enough that I can generally have at least 2 out of the 3 spots filled, if not more. Now, this Blizzard attack, the second attack for Articuno, is dependent on my opponent's bench, and so I have decided I'm going to assume half for my opponent's bench because they can play around this a little bit better, and I'm not in control of what my opponent does, so I'm assuming 50% bench capacity, 1.5, which I realize it's either 1 or 2, but I'm just taking half because there's 3 bench slots. I'm taking half. I'm assuming 50% bench capacity for attacks like this that are dependent on the opponent's bench. I just needed to come up with something mathematically. That's what I've come up with. So if you take those 2 together, you have 150 for the first attack, 175 for the second attack. Together, that's 325 divided by 2, which is 160. I rounded a little bit. Yes, I rounded down. You can round up if you really want to, but I rounded down, and then minus 20 retreat cost is 140. So I'm suggesting mathematically Articuno is not that great. I know it was supposed to be really good. I think it was really good at the beginning of the game, but now the math has just gotten a lot better. All right, Zapdos, moving on. We're up to the 145s now. We're out of the 140s. So we have first attack. We got 130 HP plus 20 attack minus 10 cost, that's 140. Second attack, 130 HP plus 100 attack on average minus 60 cost equals 170. So again, we're flipping coins here. So I'm taking the exact 50-50 value. So you have a maximum of 200 damage, you have a minimum of 0. So I'm taking the half, that's 100. So you add these two together, you have 140 for the first attack plus 170 for the second attack equals 310 divided by 2 is 155. And then you have minus 10 for the retreat cost, that's 145. Again, the reason I'm splitting these is because I'm trying to get the average. So the first attack is 140, I'm saying. The second attack, 170. I want the average of that to get the total value of this whole card mathematically. And that's why I'm dividing by 2. I'm just getting the average. Again, if you have questions, comments, anything, please feel free to put them in the comments, as I know this could be confusing if you haven't come up with it, because I've spent a lot of time thinking about this. So feel free to put some comments. All right, moving on, still in the 145. So we got Mewtwo, again, an OG, really good in the beginning of the game. Now not so much mathematically, at least, and the meta would bear that out also. So first attack, 150 plus 50 attack minus 30 cost is 170. Second attack, we're rolling now. 150 HP plus 150 attack minus 100 energy cost for the cost itself, and then minus 40 energy equals 160. So again, if you'll recall from what I said previously, when I value adding energy, I value it at 20. So I talked about that with Moltres. I value each adding of energy at plus 20. So in the same token, I value taking away energy at minus 20, unless it's specific energy. I'll plan to get into that in a little while. But basically, because it's discarding 2 energy, I value that at minus 20. So that's where I get the minus 40 from. So you take that as a total, you have 160 for the second attack. You add that to the first attack, you get an average of 165, and then minus 20 retreat cost is 145. All right, we got another book coming at you, Mew EX. We got first attack, 130 HP plus 20 attack, minus 10 cost is 140. Second attack, 130 HP. I am guessing 100 attack on average. Now, I don't know if that's correct. That seemed reasonable. I'm guessing because it's copying the opponent's attack, sometimes it's going to be worth 180, sometimes it's going to be worth 20. So I'm just kind of taking an average of sorts. I'm saying I think 100's reasonable to expect for genome hacking, and that's what we're going with. And then minus 60 cost for the energy cost is 170 total. So you add those together, you take the average 155 minus 10 retreat costs. That's how I get to 145. All right, moving on to Guzzlord. Again, as I said with Buzzwole, I'm taking this in a vacuum. I am not counting Celesteela as part of the math here. I'm just taking Guzzlord in a vacuum. So first attack, we have 170 HP plus 30 attack minus 30 cost, and then I'm saying plus 10 for its ability. So its ability is flip a coin till you get tails. For each head, discard a random energy from your opponent's active Pokemon. As I say in the parentheses up there, I'm saying if an energy discard is worth 20 and it hits 50% of the time, then it's worth 10. Now, obviously, you could have random high rolls where you hit heads, 2, 3, 4, whatever times. That could be worth a ton, but it's not likely. So I'm just valuing it at 10. I could say 15, but I don't want to get that specific. So I'm valuing it at 10. That puts my total attack cost for this first attack at 180. Now for the second attack, 170 HP plus 120 attack minus 100 cost is 190. So you put those together, you get 370. You divide that by 2, you get 185, but then it has 40 retreat cost. So that's what gets you down to 145. Now, obviously, if you have Celesteela and you can take away the retreat cost, Guzzlord is great, right? People run Guzzlord. It's very relevant in the meta right now. It's a very good Pokemon with Celesteela, but without it, it's not so good. In fact, I would definitely not suggest running it without Celesteela unless you're just seeing it as kind of a ending the game type of Pokemon. All right, we're moving on to the 150s. We've made it to the average of what I'm saying is the average of all of these basic Pokemon mathematically. I took all these numbers and I averaged them, and I said the average math for these basics is 150. So now we're at the average. Basically, these Pokemon represent the average, in my opinion, in a vacuum mathematically. So first example, we got Tapu Koko. For its first attack, 130 HP plus 20 attack minus 10 cost, and then because it takes an energy and attaches it, I'm saying that's plus 20, so that equals 160. For its second attack, you have 130 HP plus 90 attack minus 60 cost is 160. You take the average of those, you're at 160. Then you subtract the retreat cost at the end. Now you're at 150. Now I realize you could do some math different, because you could say, oh, well, Tapu Koko has a 1 cost attack. That should be worth something, right? You could add math for that. If it was just Mach Bolt, right? If it was just, 130 HP, 90 attack, 60 cost, just had Mach Bolt, then maybe you would say it's a worse Pokemon. And you probably could say that within reason, especially given the support for lightning. So you could add value to this mathematically because it has 2 attacks, because it has a 1 cost option. You could do the same for Mew. You could, to some degree, do the same for Mewtwo because it has 2 attacks, whatever. You could do that. I'm not doing that, but you could do that. So just wanted to throw that in there. Future Ryan here. So after thinking about this a little bit more, I think it's fair to apply some kind of mathematical value to Pokemon with at least 1 attack. So it makes sense to me to add plus 10 to every Pokemon with at least 2 attacks or more. So that would apply to Tapu Koko that we just looked at. It would apply to Mew. It would apply to Mewtwo. It would apply to Pokemon that you might see in the future of this video if you keep watching. All that to say, I do think it makes sense after thinking about it that there should be a benefit mathematically to Pokemon having more than 1 option. All right, moving on, we got Passimian EX. Now this is going to offend some of you that I just put Passimian EX in the same slot as Tapu Koko, but let's just look at the math. Hear me out. This is in a vacuum. Let's look at it. We have 130 HP plus 60 attack minus 20 retreat cost minus 30 attack cost. That gives you 140. I'm saying the ability is worth 10, and here's how I broke it down. I'm saying plus 40 for the energy, because if you have 2 energy and you die and you don't end the game, then that's plus 40 worth of energy that just went to different Pokemon. But I'm saying minus 30 for the death requirement. I realized I just had minus 20, but I switched it because that's what I had in my head. So I'm saying because it has the die, and oftentimes that's just going to lose you the game because it's an EX, I'm saying minus 30 for that. But I still think there should be some positive math for the fact that it offloads 2 energy to your bench. Because think of it, if you take Passimian and it dies and you do some damage and then you go straight into like Lucario EX or something, or some really good fighting EX Garchomp or something, and you can just come in basically for free off your bench, that's pretty good. So I think there should be some positive for that. It's not a great card practically, but I think it's okay. It could be really good with Megas potentially. If you just put Passimian in, you put 1, it dies, you do some damage, maybe even take a point, and then you go into a Mega and you have 2 free energy coming to it, that could be ridiculous. So that's my argument. It's just math. Let's move on. All right, Palkia EX, we got 150 HP, plus 30 for its first attack, minus 10 cost, that's 170. For its second attack, we have 150 HP still, plus 150 attack, minus 100 cost for the general cost. And then here's where we get into the averages again. It does 20 damage to each of your opponent's benched Pokemon. So that's a maximum of 60 to your opponent's bench. I'm taking the halfway point, that's 30. So I'm saying plus 30 for that mathematically. And then because it discards 3 energy, I'm suggesting that that's worth, again, minus 20 for each energy discarded, which is 60 total. So that leaves you at 170 for both of these attacks mathematically. You average it out, that's still 170. Then you take away the 20 retreat cost and you're at 150. So Palkia is pretty decent. It's very average. All right, speaking of average, let's go into Pachirisu. So we have 120 HP plus 70 attack. That's what I'm averaging. I'll plan to get into that in a second again. And then minus 10 retreat cost, minus 30 cost is 150. Now, Sparking Gadget, its attack says it's 40 damage, and it says if this Pokemon has a Pokemon tool attached, this attack does 40 more damage. So basically, I took the halfway point. I said if you have a tool half the time, then you could average this attack to 60 because it's max of 80, minimum of 40. But I'm saying charitably, you're probably going to have a tool a pretty decent amount of the time from deck building if you have Pachirisu in your deck. So I buffed it up to 70 on average. I don't know, I could be off there, but basically I'm saying 3/4 of the time when you attack with this, you're going to have a tool. So that's how I got 70. All right, next we're at a promo card, Lapras. I know promo cards get hate, but honestly this card mathematically is not bad. So we have 140 HP plus 80 attack, minus 30 retreat, which hurts, minus 60 cost, and then again I'm valuing the healing at just face value. So plus 20 for healing, that gives you 150. Now I know no one's playing this Pokemon. I don't think anyone's ever played this Pokemon, but mathematically, it's average. Let me briefly talk about healing though. You could value healing less in theory than just saying, oh, it's plus 20 or plus whatever you're healing, because sometimes healing doesn't matter because you're just gonna die anyway, or because you just died regardless, whatever. Sometimes healing doesn't matter, but I am just, for math purposes, I'm saying healing is face value because sometimes it's worth a lot. So in this case, it's heal 20. I'm saying that's worth 20. I think that's the easiest, cleanest way to do it, and I'm applying that across the board. All right, moving on. We got 13 left. Keep hanging in here, or you can just skip around. I'll plan to put the Pokemon types probably in the chapters below, so you can skip around if you want to. All right, we got Dialga. We got 150 HP, plus 30 for its first attack, minus 30 cost, and then I'm saying plus 40 because it's generating 2 energy. So again, I'm valuing energy generation at plus 20 a piece, which is plus 40 total. That means its first attack is pretty stinking good. So 190 total. All right, second attack, 150 HP plus 100 attack minus 100 cost equals 150. You average those two together, you're at 170 average, and then you do the minus 20 retreat cost and you're at 150. So here would be an example. It's like if you're just doing Metallic Turbo, mathematically, if my math is decent, you could argue this Pokemon is super overrated, but as soon as you add in the heavy impact, it's like, it's not that good. And also the fact that if you're just doing 30 as an EX basic, you're not doing a lot. You have to have something receiving that energy on the back end that's got a lot of high upside if you just are doing that 30. All right, check it. This is gonna make someone mad because they're gonna be like, what the heck is this doing here? But again, I'm just looking at numbers. I'm not looking at how it makes you feel emotionally. I'm not looking at the fact that this card probably has no support. I'm just saying mathematically, here's what we got. So Dhelmise EX, 140 HP, plus 80 attack, minus 20 retreat, minus 60 cost. I, after some thought, am valuing its ability as plus 10. So its ability says during your opponent's next turn, the defending Pokemon can't retreat. At first, I valued that at plus 20 because of other things that I'll plan to get into later, but I think it's not that good of an ability, but it's worth something. So I'm valuing it at plus 10. That gives it a total of 150. So I know this card has gotten crap, but at the end of the day, it's not that bad mathematically. All right, moving on to another one that I could get crap for. I've got two promos in here and 3 cards that people would be like, But all right, so we got Cresselia EX. This is probably a card that a lot of people don't even know exists, but it's 140 HP plus 80 attack, minus 20 retreat, minus 60 cost for the attack. That's 140. Now its ability says whenever you attach a psychic energy from your energy zone to this Pokemon, heal 20 damage from this Pokemon. So I am valuing this at 10 because I value healing at 20, but I have this note up here that says I think the ability can be 10 since sometimes it's either not relevant or you stop attaching energy. Therefore, I'm valuing it at 10, which is a total of 150. Talking for this long is really hard. All right, now we're getting into all the Pokemon that I would say are above rate mathematically or above the average mathematically. So first, we have Entei EX. I'm valuing this at 155. So first attack. Now, well, I say that. It only has 1 attack, but basically, because when it has 2 energy attached, it does more damage, I'm valuing that as if it's 2 attacks. So I'm basically considering that Entei has an attack that says 60 attack, 2 energy cost, and an attack that says 120 attack, 4 energy cost. That's how I'm doing it mathematically. So in light of that, first attack, 140 HP plus 60 attack minus 30 cost is 170. Second attack would be 140 HP plus 120 attack with 2 additional energy minus 100 cost is 160. Now, if you average those together, we're at 165, and then you take away the retreat, that's 145 because it's 2 retreat. I'm valuing the ability at 10. Now, this could be way too low, so forgive me if you think it's too low, but that's how I'm putting it. I'll plan to do a specific breakdown of why I think it's worth 10 when we get to Suicune, but we're not there yet. All right, moving on, we're into the 160s, so we're approaching the top end of math in the game. In fact, this is the 9th Pokemon, so there's 9 left. So some of y'all are gonna be like, you're putting Wishiwashi ahead of Entei? Well, again, math, hear me out. So Wishiwashi, 170 HP, that's tanky, plus 30 attack, minus 30 retreat, minus 60 cost, is 110. However, it has an ability here on its attack that says this attack does 40 more damage for each of your benched Wishiwashi and Wishiwashi EX. So here's the note I put. If we average average, one Pokemon met for that ability, that's 150. Now, I'm adding 10 for the consistency factor. So what I mean by that is I think on average, you're going to have probably more than one benched Wishiwashi or Wishiwashi EX if you build around it. So obviously there was a deck that had this a while ago with the, was it the fishing nets or whatever they're called, where you can get them back onto your bench. And so I think on average, you're going to average a little bit higher than one Wishiwashi on your bench. Now, if you have 3 on your bench at all times, then this is a ridiculous Pokemon. 170 HP and hitting for 130 every turn, and it's a basic. Like, if you had that at all times, that's just preposterous. But I don't think that's going to happen. Obviously, that's not taking over the meta. So regardless, I'm averaging it at 160. All right, moving on to Pokemon that I would say was almost really good, but not quite. So we have Shuckle. So we have 120 HP plus 30 attack. I'll plan to get to that in a second. Minus 10 retreat cost, minus 10 cost is 130. The reason I'm saying the attack is 30, again, is because of flipping coins. So it's 60 maximum damage, 0 minimum damage. The average of that is 30. Now I'm saying its ability is worth 30, and here's why. So it says this Pokemon takes minus 20 damage from attacks. The reason I'm not valuing it at 20 is because it's constant. So you don't have to attack. So Skarmory is an example where you have to attack to get the buff. This is just active. So the fact that it's active, I'm giving a plus 10 for the fact that you never have to attack for its ability to be working. So that's why I'm valuing it at 30, and therefore Shuckle total at 160. Now, if you're consistently rolling tails, Shuckle sucks, right? It's terrible. But if you're rolling heads all the time, it's freaking really good. So I'm averaging it. I think it's worth 160. Its ability is frankly kind of underrated. So that's my opinion here mathematically on Shuckle. All right, Raikou EX, the end of the 160s. We have 130 HP plus 70 attack, minus 20 retreat, minus 30 cost is 150. Again, I'm saying plus 10 for its ability. I will plan to get to that very shortly, and you have 160. The reason I'm saying 70 attack is because, again, I'm considering attacking the bench as mathematically the same as attacking the active. Obviously, it creates a bit of a difference, but you're sacrificing 10 damage to the active and gaining 10 to the bench. I think that cancels out mathematically and functionally as a standalone. Obviously, you add in Cyrus and stuff like that, and it gets better, but as a standalone, I think it cancels itself out. So I'm saying 70 total. I covered that with Hitmontop at the beginning of this video. I think this applies here. So 160 for Raikou. I have it at number 7 on the list. All right, moving on to the 170s. So now we're getting to the creme de la creme, the really good Pokemon mathematically, as it were. You should probably agree that all of these are really good, fairly relevant Pokemon, and mathematically I would agree with you. So we're looking at Suicune. Now, you could argue Suicune's higher. Some people might take issue it's not higher, but let me break it down. So you got 140 HP. I'm saying 70 for the attack. That's the potentially contentious part. Minus 20 retreat, and then minus 30 cost is 160. So the reason first I'm saying 70 for the attack is because, again, I'm assuming a 2/3 bench for myself and a 1/2 bench for my opponent. So that calls back to math that I did on other Pokemon. Basically, I'm assuming on average that my bench has at least 2 bench and my opponent's bench has 1.5. Now they're going to try to play around it, so they might have 1 on average and I might have 3 on average. So realistically, you could maybe say 80 is a reasonable number, but I'm saying 70 just mathematically. Don't hurt me. That's just what I'm coming to mathematically. Now for context, the highest I'm mathing any Pokemon is 180. So if you say the attack is worth 80, then suddenly Suicune is, at the top, as it were, mathematically, as far as I'm concerned. So you could say that if you put its average attack at 90, then suddenly it's basically the best Pokemon in the game. So there's some context here, but I'm averaging it at 70. That's just what I'm saying, and we'll go from there. Now, let me touch on its legendary pulse ability, which I've already talked about with Raikou and Entei, but I didn't math it out. I didn't say why I thought it was worth 10. Basically, I'm valuing card draw at 20. That's coming from different cards as well. I think they value drawing a card at 20. And then the reason I'm taking away 10 points is because it's at the end of the turn. If it was at the beginning of the turn, that would be obscene. But because it's at the end of the turn, I'm valuing that at minus 10. So I'm valuing the ability at 10 total. Now again, for Suicune, Entei, Raikou, you could value this ability higher than I'm valuing it. You could value it at 20 or whatever, and that would bump all all three of them up a degree mathematically, but this is what I'm doing. This is why I'm doing it. So there's my reasons. Let's move on to the next one.
Future Ryan again. I've done a bit more thinking here as well, so I wanted to update you. Math is never done, man. You just got to keep thinking about it, especially when it's somewhat subjective like this, at least as far as I'm concerned. But obviously DNA has their own thing, and I do think it's DNA, not Dina, after looking at it. But anyway, so for Snorlax and for the dog, Suicune, Raikou, Entei, I valued their abilities at -10 because it happened at the end of the turn, but I've had a bit of a change of heart. I think instead of valuing their abilities at -10, I should just value them normally, and then if a Pokemon had an ability that said at the beginning of a turn draw a card, or at the beginning of your turn heal +20 damage, then I should add +10 rather than taking away 10 from these abilities. One example would be Sigilyph, or Klefki would be another example. They both draw cards, or even the Eevee that draws a card. These all happen at the end of the turn. So I don't think it's fair to take away value from Snorlax and from the dogs just because they're at the end of the turn. So all that to say, the value of Snorlax and the dogs is all going up by 10 apiece. But now back to your regularly scheduled broadcast. If you're still in it, you're doing great.
All right, moving on to Arceus. We got our 170 buddy with Suicune. We got 140 HP. I'm averaging the attack again. I will plan to say it in a second, but at 110, -20 retreat, -60 cost, and then because it's colorless, I'm saying -10, and then I'm adding its ability as +10. So let's break that down a little bit. Ultimate Force, its attack starts at 70. It does 20 more for each of your bench Pokemon. So again, I'm saying for your bench, I think you can control it well enough that you average 2/3 of your bench. So on average, that would mean I'm attacking for 110 with Arceus. And then I'm adding +10 for its ability, which says this Pokemon can't be affected by any special conditions. I don't think it's an amazing ability, but it's definitely at least mildly relevant, and 10 is kind of the minimum number that I'm putting on things. So I'm saying +10. Now you might say, well, you just valued Suicune's ability at +10, and you would be right. So that could be ridiculous. Maybe I should value it higher. Obviously, Suicune drawing cards is an extremely good part of what makes it good. So I may reevaluate this math at some point and say, you know what, Legendary Pulse is worth a lot more than +10. Maybe it's worth +20, who knows, maybe more. But regardless, that's what I'm valuing it at for now. And let's head on to the top echelon. All right, this one might trip some people out, but we have the top tier here, 180. So there's 4 Pokemon in this tier. We're starting with Skarmory. So we have 140 HP, +70 attack, -20 retreat, -30 cost, and then I'm saying +20 for its effect, because its effect is during your opponent's next turn, this Pokemon takes -20 damage from attacks. Now, this math is not hard. It's not complex. I'm literally just putting numbers together. And if you agree that the -20 is -20 and the cost is the cost and everything, then Skarmory's pretty darn good. So 180, I think Skarmory's probably underused, undervalued. So just mathematically, I would say this is a very strong Pokemon. All right, let's move on to the last 3. So we got Ho-Oh EX. We have 150 HP, +80 attack, -20 retreat, -60 cost is 150. I am valuing its ability, or its effect from its attack, at least 30. I think that could even be low, but it says take a fire, water, and lightning energy from your energy zone and attach them to your benched basic Pokemon in any way you like. I think I have to value each energy as at least +20, so that's +60, but then I'm having it because it's 3 different types. So basically you have to build around it. You have to do colorless, you have to do those specific energy types. So I think that's worth having the numerical value of the effect, but I think you have to value it at least at 30, which puts it total at 180. All right, I'm going out of alphabetical order a little bit to save my main dude and my thumbnail for last, but let's hit Darkrai real quick. So we have the top 2 dudes up here and Darktina in the first tier. So let's start with Darkrai EX. So we have 140 HP, +80 attack, -20 retreat, -60 cost for its attack is 140. I'm valuing its ability at 40, and here's why. When it's in the active spot, it does 20 more damage. So basically you could add that 20 to its attack and say it's 100 for Dark Prism. So that's 20, and then I'm giving it another +20 because it can do 20 damage while it's on the bench. So basically I'm saying when it's active, it's worth 160, and then I'm also valuing it at at 20 when it's on the bench because it can just keep pinging your opponent. So that's how I'm getting to 180. All right, last but not least, we have our thumbnail man. We have one of the premier cards of Pokemon Pocket, Giratina EX. This thing is a bit of a math problem, as I said in the thumbnail, so let's break it down. We have 150 HP plus 130 attack, minus 20 retreat cost, minus 100 cost for its attack cost, and then minus 20 damage because it does 20 damage to itself. So that's 140 total. Now I'm valuing its ability at 40. Here's how I got to that. I'm saying for the energy generation, it's plus 20 because again, I value energy generation at plus 20. I'm saying it's plus 20 for being able to generate from the bench also. So the fact that it can from active or from bench generate energy, I'm saying plus 20 for that also. I'm saying plus 10 for being able to generate turn 1. So that kind of breaks math, the fact that you can go turn 1 and generate. But I'm saying because it ends the turn by generating the energy, I'm saying minus 10 for that. So I'm getting 40 total for its ability, and that's how I got there. It's somewhat arbitrary. You could do it differently. You could value these things different numerically, but that's the best I feel like I can do right now, and that gets us to 180. All right, friends, we did it. That was a ton. Again, if you have questions, comments, please leave it down below. That was a long video. I'm kind of exhausted, but it gives us a good jumping off point. All right, friends, next week we'll plan to look at another tasty tier list, so stick around for that if you want. If you got through this whole video, ideally you watched on double speed because that thing was a beast of a video. But that's it for me, so Foundation Disc Golf sign off. See ya.